here in the next 15 minutes is sort of the goal. Gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
I thank the chairman, thank our witnesses, and Mrs. Malinowski, please accept my sincere apologies and deepest sympathies. This is something that was avoidable, and I'm encouraged, frankly, because I hear colleagues that were once highly concerned about warrant practices and held hearings when they were in the majority about criminal justice reform may actually be willing to do it instead of politicize it. I felt, as a guy who was not part of the Judiciary Committee, I'm on Financial Services and Foreign Affairs, and only on this because we have seen abuses of the Fourth Amendment that creep into your financial privacy. We've seen weaponized government go after every kind of nook and cranny they can for what have historically been viewed as law-abiding citizens. The restraints against general warrants. So John Adams said general warrants. I swept up whoever might have been present in the square on certain days. These kinds of things that went on are part of what led to the revolution. So it was an abuse of privacy. But if you look at it, part of the concern for warrants is that they don't take the least risky means possible, which does expose officers to risk, but it exposes not just people that maybe you do have probable cause to suspect a crime, but it exposes their family members and others to unnecessary risk. And maybe there is a way that we should look at the intent of the Fourth Amendment, that it would minimize the risk here. It seems that there was a much less invasive way to solve the crime that was alleged here. And you would think that because of the Biden administration's focus on this crime, that this was the big crime wave that's sweeping the country, that apparently the only reason we have guns on the street are because people like Mr. Malinowski, that, but for Mr. Malinowski and people like that, the streets would be safe in Washington, D.C. People wouldn't be getting carjacked and robbed at gunpoint. Chicago wouldn't see massive waves of murders. It's pistol braces. It must be the pistol braces because they're going after the pistol braces. I mean, there is no basis in terms of the crime that the Biden administration is going after. And I think that's why the public is so concerned. You're targeting people in part, I think, because of political ideology. President Biden's recent executive order concerning firearms dealers was described by the White House themselves as getting, quote, as close to universal background checks as possible without additional legislation, end quote. I do not recall Congress voting on universal background checks. On the contrary, this is a bureaucrat at an agency passing pseudo-laws, fake laws, and they're using them to effectively force defendants to spend their treasure defending against a crime that hasn't even become crime in the normal way by law. So, Mr. Kleckner, what steps can be taken to defund and defeat these fake laws originating at the ATF in particular?
I think Congress needs to hold them accountable.
And to point that out, one of the main ways we do that is with appropriations.
Yep.
So it's not just whether they're funded, but what can they do with the funds? And part of that is timely. We're going back into appropriations, having passed on holding accountable the agency this time. I think hopefully we'll find the resolve to do that this time in the next path. Mr. Cummins, look, I just wanted to close out with you because you're highlighting an important case. You've had a background where you are familiar with the warrant process. And I think not just here in this case, you pointed out, look, it is a practice. Is it a good practice to knock at 6 a.m. and come in? And, you would think that, El Chapo, maybe, no-knock warrants. There's a time and a place. But how do they weigh the right time and place for those kind of tactics versus, maybe less intrusive, less risky tactics?
Well, we've given great deference to law enforcement to choose their tactics, and we are concerned about law enforcement officer safety. And so that's a good reason to do that. But I do believe we've over-militarized our law enforcement. I have great concerns about that. I think we do this way too often, and we need to take a hard look at it. In this particular case, I don't think they did it lawfully at all, and there's zero justification. But even that said, law enforcement does this kind of thing quite a bit.
You point out that there's surveillance for a while, and it wasn't like an exigent circumstance. There wasn't evidence that was going to be flushed down the toilet or disposed of. There was evidence that would be physically present on site, and there were lots of periods of time where Mr. Malinowski was in a place where he could have been detained and questioned, could have been brought to the residence, or could have been caught as he's walking into or about to walk out of a home. So there were lots of less invasive means, and I just hope that we can find a way in statute or in practice to be able to say, let's do it that way more often, and let's not violate the civil liberties of our citizens. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The ranking member is recognized for closing